Back in the 80s, Sega were on a hot streak when it came to arcade games. Every single machine that sported that flashy blue logo got my attention, and rarely disappointed. In 1989, a new cabinet arrived at my local arcade with a bright orange marquee, and I was hooked immediately. Alien Storm and Altered Beast veteran Makoto Ochida primarily handled development on this one, so it was quality through and through, though he had initially planned it to be something more along the lines of an RPG, but Sega at the time were better known for their meaty action experiences. So the result was Golden Axe, a chunky brawler that featured 3 playable protagonists. All of the games in the series look really good, but I have a certain amount of fondness for this original, as well as its arcade-exclusive sequel, The Revenge of Death Adder, which, surprisingly, never saw a home release, which is a real shame because it surpasses the original in almost every way. The Mega Drive Genesis follow-up we got for home consoles was only marginally different than the original. It's fine and all, but pales in comparison when pitted against the coin-up sequel. Over the years, Golden Axe has been ported to almost everything. It is one of Sega's flagship franchises, and it's as fun to play today as ever. As an arcade kid in the 80s, I was pretty invested in it, and over the years, it has kind of followed me around. It was in my art college pub, down the street from my first apartment in a local pizza joint, and it was even at the music club I used to perform and do sound at. This arcade cabinet was just always around, begging for my quarters, and I could never resist taking a few moments to give it another go. To me, something was often lost when Sega ported their games over to consoles. As fun as all of these were out in the wild, they never felt worth it to own at home, at least for me who had an arcade close by. Golden Axe is a great game, but it's not all that challenging. It could be finished for a handful of quarters at the arcade, less if you had a co-op buddy. Typically, I'd save my hard-earned money for bigger home releases. Something like goldenaxewarrior, the 8-bit spin-off developed and released by Sega for the Master System. Alright, so just to get this out of the way right now, it's a direct ripoff of Zelda. There's just no getting around it. In fact, it's so similar that I'm surprised that the almighty N and their tenacious lawyers didn't take Sega out for how brazen they were with this thing. Normally, I don't like to compare one game with another, unless we're talking ports or sequels, but that's going to be nearly impossible here because, well, just look at this thing in action. I've said it a million times on this channel, and I'll say it again. The first Zelda is one of my favorite games ever. It's open, challenging, and pretty much everything I look for in an action-adventure game. Since I got my hands on the gorgeous golden cart when it dropped in the West all of those years ago, I was obsessed. What's more, I've been chasing that high ever since. Even back in the day, every game that I could get my hands on that shared even a passing resemblance to Zelda got some attention from me. What's weird is that Golden Axe flew under my radar completely at the time it was released, even though I had a Master System. I wasn't aware of its existence. That is, until the early aughts, and even that was by accident. You see, back before the internet pretty much ruined retro gaming collecting for me, I'd buy up massive bundles. goldenaxewarrior was included in a large Master System collection that I acquired. To this day, it's still one of the best hauls I think I've ever had. Nintendo had pretty much dominated the market in my country, so 8-bit Sega stuff was always a challenge to collect. The plus side? It was always really inexpensive. Yeah, I don't know, figure that one out. So this package deal came with 2 consoles, 6 controllers, the 3D glasses, a couple of guns, and about 25 games, complete in box. It took me months to get around to playing Golden Axe Warrior, but when I did, I was floored. I mean, it's Zelda. Well, it's not Zelda, but it's like a Sega Zelda. It's Sega's answer to the first Nintendo Zelda, and it's pretty good. Straight out of the gate, the game introduces itself with a pretty cool little story piece accompanied by some excellent music by Chikeko Kamatani. It tells the tale of an ancient war fought between giants and the power of the elders. The golden axe is the catalyst of this backstory, as a warrior used it to eliminate the evil. 9 magical crystals were eventually used by a royal family in the Kingdom of Firewood to preserve peace until the evil Death Adder reared his head and stole the crystals in order to avenge the giant's cause. You play as the hero, whose parents were killed by Death Adder. It's your job to enter 9 labyrinths, defeat the monsters, and reclaim the crystals. Sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? After this relatively in-depth narrative dump, you'll get an awesome title screen with this greased-up warrior who, by the way, looks nothing like your main man throughout the actual game. What I find strange is that the series itself is based off of the color of Gilius Thunderhead's axe, which was just an incidental name that stuck after a few other titles were abandoned. The question is, why didn't they just make Gilius the playable protagonist and be done with it? So it's called Golden Axe, but sadly you'll be handling swords for long stretches of the game, and the animation makes them a bit annoying to use. Your little dude is right-handed, and the swords only poke out from that one side, which wouldn't be a problem if the combat wasn't so damn fast. Seriously, the enemies basically run all around the screen, which only exacerbates the issues I had with fighting. I'm sure this is mostly a me problem, but I often find myself missing enemies and taking collision damage. The combat is grid-based, which is typical for a game like this, but the problem I have is that you can be in 2 squares at the same time, meaning you can take damage if you aren't aligned with your target. This makes the sword very tough to use, as it leaves your shield side wide open, which is kind of an oxymoron if you think about it. The game itself seems designed for axe combat. It has a nice swing that covers the front of your character, similarly to the sword from A Link to the Past. It might be slower, but it's a much more reliable weapon in my opinion. As for items, there are quite a few to be collected. Usually these are nabbed from one of the labyrinths, but there are some to be found hidden on the overworld as well. Most of the time, one of these treasures needs to be acquired in order to reach the next area. Among them, you'll find a canoe that enables safe travel across rivers, dungeon obstructions, and shallower waters. A full-on ship to sail the goddamn seas to reach a new continent. That's right! This game has more than one explorable landmass. You'll also get your hands, or feets, on some speed shoes, because the getting around wasn't fast enough to begin with, and the magic rope, which, as far as I can tell, is just a regular rope, but it enables your little Dragon Warrior Dragon Quest Squat Viking Munchkin to ascend and rappel. It would have been nice if the climbable points were easier to spot, but that's just a subjective nitpick. Further along in the game, you'll get an ice bell as well, which is handy to navigate the fire regions. Along with the few items that enable you to further explore the large world, you'll acquire armor upgrades, shields, and keys. Taking too much damage will cause your armor to rust, which is a neat little effect, and there are 4 elemental-themed magic spells that can be learned as well. Earth, Thunder, Fire, and Water. 3 of the 4 can be leveled up a second time, and the magic is very useful all around. Some spells enable you to bust open hidden passages, others are more effective against enemies. The little blue urns at the top help you keep track of how much you can cast, and, like life containers, these can be accumulated all over the place to bump up the amount your little guy can hold. The thing that sucks is that you'll need to swap out your melee weapon in order to use it. Basically, the Master System controller has a limited amount of buttons, so there's only one dedicated to action. The other brings up the inventory menu. Most of the traversable tools just work without needing to be selected, but you'll still be spending a metric fuck ton of time in the menus. For example, there will be areas where you'll need to bust up some rocks, then chop up some shrubbery, all on one screen. Switch, swap, use, swiggle, wiggle, beep, boop, bop, boop, 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 just to get it done. It starts to get annoying after a while. You're going to be switching things out a lot because the world is so dense. Nearly every screen has a secret, which is pretty cool. I mean, who doesn't dig hidden areas? But this game often feels a lot more confusing to navigate than it should. On one hand, I dig how geographically large the world is. On the other, it feels restricted and claustrophobic at times. Sega gives the illusion of freedom here, but ultimately the world is divided into sections, with the opening quarter being the trickiest to navigate, with its fairly dense maze-like forests, deserts, and mountain landscapes. Labyrinths are strangely close together, yet irritating to locate. Maybe it's just me, but the layout of everything is woven up so tightly that it feels tangled. I wouldn't call it bad, but it's definitely not among my favorites when it comes to the design of an overworld. From Software's 2009 release, 3D Dot Game Heroes has a similar style, and that's my biggest hang-up with that one as well. Look, it's probably not easy to assemble a world that is almost completely explorable from the get-go, but I just can't fully get behind this type of design. It's a quagmire at times, and the way the areas are gated off makes me frustrated. The first and the third Zelda games handle world design much better. They give the player enough breathing room to explore at the beginning. The first Zelda doesn't hold your hand at all, and you can access the entire map straight out of the gate, with a bit of perseverance. A Link to the Past is a lot more linear, but it tricks the player into thinking they can do what they want, with a large enough portion of the game to explore, with little hidden trinkets to be found. More importantly, neither of those overworlds feel like mazes to me. They leave the confusing bits for the dungeons. Golden Axe Warrior does open up after the fourth labyrinth or so, but there are some very specific things you'll need to do to get there, and I think these might have the tendency of turning some new players off. It's a bit too rigid at the beginning, with beats that nearly need to be followed to the T. Sure, some of the labyrinths can be dealt with out of order, but largely you'll be following a very direct, curated sequence of events. Alright, so the dungeons, or labyrinths as this game calls them, yeah, well, these are all fine. They don't reinvent the wheel or anything, and outside of some minor additions, they basically play out the same as what we've seen before. There are some candelabras that can be pulled to reveal secret passageways and lit up to lift the darkness, but by and large, they are pretty straightforward. The bosses that reside in them are good enough, but the designs of a couple repeat far too early. I mean, the first and the third big bads are palette swaps with different movesets, for instance, and most of these encounters can be cheesed the exact same way throughout the game, which makes them feel poorly designed. Look, I'm not trying to sound too negative here because I like Golden Axe Warrior, but this thing was released in 1991. The first Zelda was years before, and Newtopia for the PC Engine was already out at this point, so yeah, I think it's safe to say that the bosses leave a bit to be desired overall. A couple are good, but none of them are particularly engaging or memorable in my opinion. They get redundant quickly into the adventure, and the fact that they can nearly all be cheesed makes them trivial. I don't want to sound too flippant or dismissive, but a lot of elements here are carbon copies of ones done elsewhere, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but it also makes this game susceptible to direct comparisons. It does do some pretty good things at times, but the bosses just aren't its strong suit. I'm not suggesting that the ones in the first Zelda are any better, but that game was released many years before this one, and it was attempting something new for the time. But hey, how about we start leaning into the things that Golden Axe Warrior does well? I'd say that the presentation overall is its most charming quality. With the benefit of the relatively large color palette of the Sega Master System, this game really pops. Everything is well detailed and lush, with a ton of variety between traversable areas. There are some nice animations to the characters and environments that make this a really beautiful looking game from start to finish. There are only around a dozen music tracks, but what's here is catchy, appropriate for the areas, and memorable. The quality is top-notch, but it would have been nice if a few of the later areas got their own music pieces. Still, I can't really knock what's here, even if it does get a tad repetitive, because that's just par for the course when it comes to these types of games. Throughout the entire thing, you'll get to visit many different towns with interesting, useful people. They offer up clues in plain English and provide a safe haven for respite. In these tiny villages, you'll be able to shop for wares, get some new pointers, and save with this Gandalf-looking motherfucker. He can also be found hidden among the overworld as well, so there are definitely enough places to mark your progress. All three of the playable protagonists from the core Golden Axe series can be found throughout the journey as well, which is a really nice touch. I really like how a rendition of the arcade game's theme plays when you find them too. The world itself is just really interesting to explore, with little touches such as destroyed villages and hidden NPCs that make it feel like your quest has meaning. It's immersive, and the story it tells works quite well. Horns are your currency in this game, and you'll find that you might have to grind a few enemies in order to purchase an item, but this only happens a handful of times, and only if you aren't following the intended path laid out in front of you. For instance, my first time playing through this, I thought I needed to buy an apple to give to Gillian? Anyway, so I killed enemies until I had enough horns to purchase one from a vendor. Shortly thereafter, I found one close by in a destroyed village. What I'm saying is that the game normally gives you the things you need in order to progress, and currency is rarely crucial. You can buy a new shield, purchase some health, and buy keys, but you shouldn't feel too put out by the prices. As you start getting better, you'll rarely need to shop anyway, which is a good thing, because grinding really sucks, dude, and dying results in a loss of some of your currency, which is an unnecessary penalty in any game.
What happened to all my fucking horns, dude? What the fuck?
Currency also gets stripped from you by disgruntled villagers in hidey holes all across the land because Zelda. But don't worry, because there are games you can play to get more horns. Some of these secret areas can be a bit tricky to find, with a few requiring a trigger or switch to be activated before they reveal themselves. The good thing is that the axe simply mows down bushes, so you'll be able to swiftly search the world for staircases and the like. There's a map, but it's merely a blip on an empty grid. Again, we've seen this before, but much later in the adventure, and I mean like at the very end of the game, you'll get a magic balloon that enables you to fill it in completely. This is handy to search out the remaining items before the final boss, I guess, but it should have come much earlier in the adventure. It's acquired in the 9th Crystal Labyrinth, and the distance to the 10th and final one is a stone's throw away. Speaking of these later labyrinths, I'd say that the last few, excluding the one housing Death Adder, are pretty easy and can be beaten in less than 15 minutes each, which isn't necessarily a complaint, but if you're struggling with the labyrinths and are thinking of giving up, stick with the game because it gets substantially easier, at least in my opinion. The one thing that is prevalent among all of the labyrinths is that magic can be a bit of an issue to regulate. A lot of blocks need to be shot at, and enemies rarely drop urns to refill your big blues. It's kinda cool that many of the spellcasters drop magic, and that so many of the designs are brought over from the arcade beat-em-up, but they don't respawn until you leave the labyrinth entirely, so you'll need to stock up often. The spells even share similarities with those from that game, and the blue bottles look the same. It's a nice touch. I'm also a fan of the water magic and how it refills some of your life. It's always nice to have a healing spell in these types of games. If you hold the action button down, your little horny gnome boy will pivot in place, which is extremely handy when you're casting spells or striking with a melee weapon. The controls are very tight, even if the gameplay is a tad too fast for my liking. At the end of the day, Golden Axe Warrior is pretty damn solid. I'm sure that there are some people out there that prefer it to the original Zelda, and if you do, I can't really argue with that. There are some interesting bits tossed in that help it feel a bit different, but ultimately, this is one of the biggest rip-offs in the history of the medium. That's not an insult by any means, because I really enjoy it, but as I said before, It's pretty blatant. Still, it's well made and fun, and that's all that really matters. Plus, this is sort of that Zelda 2 game that those of you who were disappointed with The Adventure of Link can play, and hopefully be happy with. Unfortunately though, this one is getting pretty pricey for the official cart, but it is available on Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection on the PS3 and Xbox 360 as an unlockable, which is pretty awesome. All you'll need to do is use magic 10 times in Golden Axe 3 to play it, and it's a really decent port. It's also just another great reason to buy this collection. There have been many Sega bundles over the years, and this is hands down one of the best, with over 40 quality games, as well as some unlockable secret ones tossed in. Next time on this channel, we'll be taking a look at another Golden Axe spin-off, so if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe, and hey, if you dug this video, give it a like, it helps.